Thank you for joining us for another episode of Adoption Dialogue, the show all about adoption. I'm one of your hosts, Judith Alexis Craig, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Before. And today we're going to talk about holidays and traditions. This is what affects individuals with families and the little young children who go into families who may have come with their own traditions that they're used to in their biological families. And when they move into the new family, they have to adapt to different traditions, or do they? That's what we're going to discuss today.
It's such a great question. And just to kick it off, we want to acknowledge that the holiday period can be really challenging for some folks. There are folks with so many different journeys and experiences, and that's not always an easy task for people to actually be joyous during this holiday season. So we want to start by acknowledging that and by saying to folks, if this is a time that's very challenging for you, please reach out and get support. That is first and foremost. Your health, mental health, and well-being is key, and it's really important that you take care of yourself during this holiday season. And when we say season, what do we mean? Because really, between the 1st of November and the 15th of January, there are 29 different holidays that are celebrated across the world. That's a lot of holiday time, a lot of gathering with people, with friends and family, colleagues, and festivities. So we appreciate that's a very long period of time for folks who find it challenging. Just in this winter season alone, there are 6 main celebrations, and I'm sure there are so many others, but there's Hanukkah, Christmas, winter solstice, Diwali, Kwanzaa, and the Chinese New Year, and many more. So those are a few of the highlighted ones. And we want to talk a little bit today about what are some of the ways that we celebrate our holidays? How do we do that? And how do we, as Auntie Sally said, blend the traditions and holidays, whether that be religious or cultural, a mix of both? And how does that work within adopted families specifically? So Auntie, can you share a little bit about your experience as an interculturally adoptive family? You, of course, coming from Ghana, and your children from the Caribbean. Can you share a little bit about sort of the celebrations that you focused on in your home?
Yeah. Before I say that, one of the things that we want to stress also is the fact that when people are going to adopt children who are from another race or another culture, it's important that they include the people's culture into their way of life. And therefore, you have to think about it. If I'm going to adopt somebody who doesn't come from my background, is their culture the kind of culture that I can comfortably include into my lifestyle? And it's something that you have to be very honest with yourself, because if you can't include it into your lifestyle, I think you have to think again about adopting somebody from that other part of the world. Let me start on that premise. In Ghana, we have several. I come from Ghana, and we have several traditions. Obviously, we celebrate all of them. There's some of them that we don't celebrate. But what I did was allow them to lead me into celebrating what. And I'll give you an example. We have a twin festival because in Ghana, twins are a symbol of fertility. They're also a symbol of harvest amongst the gods. So when we have our harvest festival, it's all around twins, and twins take the lead, and they play a very, very prominent part in this festival in Accra, in Ghana. When the children were 3 years old, I took them to Ghana. As soon as I get to a country, I send them to nursery there so they can get acquainted with children in the new school, get to know a new environment. They loved it because they make new friends every time. One morning when the children woke up on a Friday, one of them said to my mother first, "Mama, can I please have yam and egg when I come back from nursery today?" Then the other one came to me and said, "Mommy, can I please have egg and yam when I come back from nursery today?" So when they went into the car, my mother turned to me and said, "Sally, what did the children just ask? Did they really ask for egg and yam?" I said, "Yes, Mama, they did." And I'm even surprised that they did, because I didn't even know that that was anything that was a favorite of theirs. So in Ghana in the summer, the harvest festival for Gaza in the summer is all around twins, because twins symbolize harvest, plenitude, and everything. So that's a particular festival that in our house we don't particularly celebrate. And that's also because we don't have twins in our family anyway. She said, "Well, what is extraordinary is that today of all days in the calendar, it's the only day that twins eat a special meal that is made out of egg and yam."
Wow. And they didn't know that. They were only 3 years
How
old.
the mother, didn't even know this.
Wow.
I had no idea about this. I said, Mama, for real? She said, yes. Girl, I tell you, my mother, the speed with which she went and did that egg and yam, you have no idea. She had that egg, and it's a special meal called uto. It's yam with palm oil and then boiled egg. Oh, yes, Mama had the egg and yam ready for the twins when they came back from the nursery, and they ate it with a lot of glee. It's quite bland, but they loved it, you know. And Mama told them that this is a festival, this is a meal for twins, and said to me that this is something that because they've asked for, well, they have spiritually asked for it. So it's a tradition I
Mm.
continue. So every birthday of the children, they come home and I make them that particular festival. And they love it because it's a festive dish for twins. You know, it led me to what they wanted to do. I'll go back to another tradition. When in Ghana you adopt children, or when you have a situation where a child is estranged from the family and the child comes back, we have a beautiful ceremony which is called an outdooring and also a naming ceremony. We name them. And that's usually done when a child is born. Exactly 8 days after the child is born, which is exactly a week from the day, that's when they are outdoored. People get to see them for the first time because for the first 7 days they stay indoors and nobody gets to see them. They do not actually have a name. So they get named on that 8th day.
Okay.
And this is a tradition that we have. So when you adopt a child, we go through the same process. So we would actually name them, give them a name for the family. Now, because my children were twins, and we also have specific twin names for children in Ghana, particularly because of our festival, it was important that Lawe and Arata were given their twin names. It was up to them if they wanted to use it or not.
Because
Yeah,
naming is such an important
important.
part, right?
Absolutely,
So that's really
absolutely.
helpful to understand
Yeah.
that you gave them the names in addition to the names they had, is what
Yes,
you
yes. And in fact, what I did with Arata and Lawe's names, no name has been excluded. All of their names are on their passport. It goes on forever and a day. And then
I love
I
it.
know, yeah, all of it. And because their name tell their story,
Yes, yes,
you cannot
right.
exclude it. And it means something at every stage in their lives. That's all of them. That makes up who they are. So we went through this process. I must say this, when the children came, they were developmentally delayed, and therefore they were not talking at this stage. And one wasn't even sure how much they understood, you know, because they must have been at 2 years, just before 3 years old. And we had the ceremony. The ceremony was done in Da, my language, throughout. You know, so the kids were all dressed up and they're walking through around the place and they could see the ceremony going on. Now, as to what they understood, I knew they wouldn't understand anything because, first of all, it was my language which they wouldn't understand. Okay, so that was done. Everybody had a merry time. Then they went. 10 days later, exactly 10 days later, the children woke up and I heard them calling each other by the twin names that they were given at the
Wow.
naming ceremony. That was a
Wow.
shock. It was such a shock to us, we couldn't believe it. He was calling her out and she was calling him away. And I thought, but how could they possibly have even understood it? It was done in Ghana, you know, and it was done because they don't know how to do that festival in English. It's a kind of very poetic language. Anyway, so they carried on talking, calling each other by that name. So we switched and started calling them by that name, and that's why they have that name today. However, when we had a meeting with their siblings were very offended because they obviously didn't want the younger sisters' names to be changed. So I told them, it's okay, you can still call them by their name. They're still the same people. It doesn't matter what you call them, they're still the same people. So this is where
Yeah.
I'm saying that we allowed ourselves to be led by them. We do what we think we should do and then see what happens. If they had carried on calling themselves Adam and Amber, we would have continued because that's what we're, even after the names, we continue calling them Adam and Amber. Yeah.
Beautiful. And it's a beautiful example of it's not taking away from, as you said, it's adding to, and that celebration, that more, why not, right?
Yeah.
But then that clarity of them choosing for themselves and having that autonomy, but knowing that, because it can be very hard to think you don't want to offend you as family. They don't want to offend their biological or birth family either. So it can be a really tricky spot for, especially when children are children and they're younger, you know, and as you get older, it can be a little easier to sort of stand in your power and claim for yourself. But I can appreciate the challenge that must have been for them in some respects, for sure.
I need to say this as well. Actually, I need to say it because I think it's important for this.
Mhm.
Because obviously, I'm Christian, I'm a Catholic, and they are also Catholics. We used to go to church every Sunday. And church became a very important place for me because that what became the mirror through which I saw how the children were socially developing. And it was very important for us. And on one particular day, after they were now called Darata, and we would go to church every Sunday. And on one particular Sunday, there were little boys in the church who used to run around the altar while the priest was preaching. He didn't mind. But I used to tell them that that's really not the way to behave. So you wouldn't join in that sort of. So they knew it was a bit of a naughty behavior. So one day, and there was one particular boy who was all over the place, darting here, there, and everywhere. So we went to church on one particular day, and Lawe said to Mommy, "Where is Adam?" And I turned to him and I said, "You are Adam." Then he opened his eyes, dilated his eyes, and then he started crying and screaming and shouting and hollering. And I couldn't frighten Lawe down. And I said, what could I have possibly said wrong? So I had to leave the church. We came home. He couldn't stop crying. He cried all afternoon. And I just didn't know what I had done wrong. So the next morning, I called up the social worker, which I might say is Irish. And I said, this is what has happened. And she said, oh no. And she said, once he had been given the name away, and this is why it's important to talk about this now, I realize I have to. When he was named Adam, he saw himself as one person and he identified with all those naughty kids on the altar. So the Adam that he saw was the children on the altar who were very, very naughty. And he was also quite challenging when he was young. But now that he is Lawe, he's a different person. And therefore, to go back and call him Adam was denying him the person that he sees himself to be today. I had never heard anything like it. So you know what? We went back to the drawing board, brought the two of them together, sat down, brought out all of their life story work, the book again, went through the whole process and explained to them that the original names were Adam and Amber, and it's still their name. All we've done is just added the twin names to it, and it's up to them to use it or not. It doesn't make them any different to who they were before and who they are now. We must have done it well enough for Lawe to understand. And then after that, life continued with him as...
That is really beautiful and such important work that you don't just push against the child and, degrade the child for having outbursts of that nature. This was something that was so deeply rooted in him, and really he needed that time to understand it in a very clear way for him. And I just think it was handled so beautifully that you went back to, this is who you are.
Yeah.
And we honor who you are, all of you. And I think that is something that really needs to be celebrated in children's life. That's part of celebrations, right?
It is.
And the fact you have a naming ceremony,
Yep.
that's a very powerful process. And I think it's important that people can really understand that you can bring in your culture and your child's culture. So it's blending them together. It's not saying, no, your culture is not important. You're no longer of this background. They will always and forever be of the Caribbean descent. And may we ask where they're from? What's their...
There was a bit of confusion. The social workers couldn't work it out. We thought it was Haiti at some point, but actually the heritage is, maybe you should ask them, but the heritage is Bajan and Kittian, Barbados and St. Kitts. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, which is fantastic. Yeah.
So what a beautiful blend then of, once you figured out where, it's a beautiful way. Did you find that when they were growing up, did you ever travel to either of those countries? Did you have friends from there? Were you able to incorporate elements of their culture celebrations? Or
I think that's a very good question, Judith. When I adopted my children, I don't think at that time I was quite fully aware because things weren't quite as evolved as they are now. I didn't see the importance of, culture. I thought, well, come on, they're black, I'm black. That's all that matters, However, once I got the children, I also began to realize that I hardly had any Caribbean friends. So I literally went out of my way and I made as many Caribbean friends as I could find. I went to go and baptize them. We have 6 Caribbean godparents for each of them, three, then 1 Ghanaian. So they all have 4 godparents, 1 Ghanaian each, and then the 3 were Caribbean. And it was a very important decision that we took because along the journey, there are lots of things that would happen in the family. And a character travels with people's DNA. And I would call up my friends and I'd ask them, what's this about? And they would explain it to me. I wish I could recall some of them right now. I can't recall it. If it comes, I'll tell you. But I realized the importance of being able to parent my children alongside my Caribbean friends. They became a rock for me. And it's interesting how I look back now. And I think that throughout the journey of the children's lives, the greatest rocks that I had at that time were the Caribbean friends that I'd made. And it was so important for them. Then one of the fastest things I learned were the Caribbean foods like rice and peas and the curried goat and all of that. I'd learned how to cook them. And I can tell you I cook it well because they love it. And what is beautiful is that we then got to a point where we listened to all kinds of music. And because Lawa is musical, he listened to every kind of music. His music is obviously from the Caribbean, And so we ended up having kind of a blended culture that it was very difficult to see where you draw the line between one and the other because it just fused together, and nothing was excluded. And that's how we did it. However, with traveling, we didn't get to go to their country of origin because we did not know until much later. We were not aware of it. And also, the other thing I wanted them to experience, which was important for me, and I say this for social workers, that when they're going to do the background checks of these children, they really must make sure they should include details about the birth parents. What school they went to, which town they lived in, if it was in another country. It's so important. We didn't have any of that information. The children and I traveled a lot, and everywhere we went, we had family to go and stay with. So they were always with family. And because I knew that their origins were from the Caribbean, I said, when we find it, I wanted us to be able to locate where they came from so we can walk the footsteps of where the birth mother was and, walk the school that we went to visit it, make a meaningful trip of it. We never found that information until it was quite late, Yes, that's right.
And you always think, what a beautiful journey to go on now, even though I know they're adults, they're well in their 30s now, but what a beautiful opportunity hopefully you'll have. I know the last few years, everybody's been pretty grounded, but hopefully in the future you can take that journey together. And I think that's a really special opportunity. And having that information now, I always think it's never too late, right? But I love that you were able to fuse that together, what you did take. And I think the point I just want to pick up on that you made was you went out and realized I don't have a lot of Caribbean friends. That's going to be important for mirrors for my children and for you as a parent, because you knew there were differences, cultural differences and practices. And although you didn't have a specific country, you could at least have a generalized understanding. And I just want to honor you in making that choice and decision and say thank you, on behalf of your children and on adopted children, because that is when you have the intercultural or interracial dynamics in adoption. It's so important to do just that. Find what you can find and not say, oh, we don't know, throw your hands up and forget about it and move on, right?
And not make an effort and not make the effort. I think making the effort, but also making the efforts enriching, because I'll tell you something. I remember later on down the line, one of my children threw something in my face. Oh, but that's how Caribbeans behave. And I said, no, that is not how Caribbeans behave, because I know them. So you see,
now.
Yes, I know it. So you can't pull the wool over my eyes. And this is where people don't recognize that when you don't make the effort to get to bring in the child's heritage, you do yourself a disservice. As an adoptive parent. You weaken your role as a parent. You strengthen your role when you're able to embrace everything that child comes with. It enriches your culture because it enriched our culture. We now had an extensive array of food that we used to eat. It was wonderful. Our foods are similar, but now I was cooking it in different ways, some of which became my favorite too, and it was just wonderful. So I think what it also does is it makes the children know that they're accepted in their entirety.
Yes.
When they settle with you, they sink into you and settle. But the thing is, so I'm doing this effort at my end, but there's also the other thing about them. Are they accepting you? And we all adults assume that because we've adopted the children, they must accept us. No, not necessarily. No. And as I told you earlier on, my son, he rejected me completely from the beginning. And one day, I'll just never forget this. when the marriage and then he was going to school, he said, "Oh, mommy," he went and picked a flower from the garden and he gave it to me. He said, "Mommy, I want you to hold on to this flower and just look at it and know that when I'm at school, I'll be thinking about you." It was so cute.
So
Another time he said,
beautiful.
"Mommy, I don't want to go to school today," because I said, "Why don't you go to school? I want to babysit you today."
I love it. I love
Honestly,
it.
it's just too
And what acceptance, right? Of him
yeah,
being able to
honestly,
reach out. That must have been a really
absolutely.
poignant moment
Oh, it absolutely was.
for
I
you.
mean, absolutely poignant. And I remember one day he came back from school and said, "Mommy," I said, "How your school today? How did you start?" "Oh, I didn't learn anything today." "Oh, really? How does that happen?" He said, "Mommy, because I was thinking about you all day." No way. What could you possibly have been thinking about me? What about me? I think by now, Mommy is going to make a cup of tea. I thought, oh, he spent the whole day walking through my
For
living.
day.
That
But
is,
how beautiful, because even in the moments when you didn't feel like he was accepting you
yeah.
and he had rejected you, he was observing you. He was
Yes,
watching
yes,
everything you did, from your cup
yes,
of tea
yes,
to when you would sit down and,
yes,
all of
yes.
those actions. He was actually receiving all of it. And it just took some time. And I think you're right. If parents need to be aware that this is a relationship. And with every relationship, we allow it time to breathe and to grow. And how much more for a relationship that has been brought on by really some very sad circumstances, often, right? At both ends. Often you've come together and it's happy, but there's still sadness that lingers there, and you have to give people time again to grieve through that and to adapt to this new relationship. We can't expect a bond to happen overnight,
You must remember,
right?
Judith, the other thing as well is that happy for the adult, but is it happy for the child? The child has made no decision. They have not been privy to any of these decisions. It's been
Oh,
made over their heads. Somebody has chosen to bring them into their home. They've materialized in somebody's home, a strange home. They don't even know what's going on. What is happening? They have no idea. And they're suddenly in your home, thrust into your. Why should they like you?
yeah,
Why should they like you at first when they don't even know what they're there for?
yeah,
And then suddenly they're not waking up every morning. Suddenly they're waking up in the same house. They're not going back home. Can you imagine how unsettling that is for a child? How can they like anything about it? It's terrifying. So I
yeah.
realized that Lawe was just being true to himself. He was being real. And one of the things that made me realize how real Lawe also was, I must tell you this, was amazing. The first time we traveled all the way to Ghana, this is a long journey,
Mm.
7 hours or whatever it was. We arrived there, and usually it's festive celebrations. He joined and he met cousins for the first time who were all their age. And the beautiful thing about it was that there were about 7 cousins, and there was a little age gap. And the age gap is where the two of them slotted into perfectly.
Oh,
So
that's
you
beautiful.
stand in a line with the elders coming down, the two of them slot into that gap, and then it continues. So, when they got into that environment, they felt, yes, they sort of sank into it because this is where we belong. But that night, Arata went off to bed. She slept. I refused to sleep. I said, "Lawe, why aren't you going to bed?" "Mommy, because I want to sleep in my own bed."
Right.
I said,
Yeah.
"Your own bed? But this is your bed." "No, Mommy, my own bed." And I realized that even though we told them we're going to Ghana, at that age of 3, they had no concept of the distance. They knew we
Yeah.
were an aeroplane.
Yeah.
They had no idea that the aeroplane meant that you're actually flying thousands of miles. In any case, what does thousands of miles mean to a child?
Yeah. Exactly.
Can you imagine this? And I remember sitting and thinking, what do you do with a child like this? Such a concept had never entered my mind. And that in that moment, literally, I had to go and get a globe, a map, in the
Yeah.
middle of the night, get a
Yeah.
map, take my time, and teach Lawe geography to help him to understand why it was not possible for him to sleep in his own bed, because to get there would be morning. I think he must have grasped the concept somehow
Yeah.
and accepted it and finally went to bed. But also, it gives you an inkling into where the children are at when they
Oh,
come to us.
yeah. Especially if they come, I think that's a great segue into children who also come intercountry, right? When you have intercountry adoption, they're not only leaving a foster family or staff who cared for them, they're leaving everything that was normative for them and their culture. The smells, the sounds, all of those things are taken
Yeah,
and they're plopped into this new environment,
yeah,
so you can understand so much better why you may see behavior that may be shocking, and you think, but I'm giving them all of this love and care and all of these presents and all of these things. What they just want, as Laway did, was his own bed.
bed.
just
That's it.
wanted his bed that he was used to, that I would imagine he had probably just gotten used to being in your home, right? And
Mm-hmm.
accustomed to his new bed, and he had
Mm-hmm.
accepted that as his bed now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my foster family, I'm not in that bed anymore. This is my bed. So
Mm-hmm.
that coming, when it did, would have probably been very jarring for him, and could also impact him, in how he would have been able to progress. So
Yeah,
I think that's such a beautiful.
it is. And Judith, but the other thing as well that I don't know whether you noticed as well is beds. The child's bed is very, very important for adopted children. Whenever we traveled, it doesn't matter where we were in the world, however wonderful it was, as soon as the children come home, they run straight into
Yeah,
their bed.
yeah,
So their bed
comfortable,
had a
familiar.
whole a meaning that I think even I didn't understand. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's key. One of the little tips that people often say to do when you travel, when you have a child coming from another home, is to actually use the same detergent. Ask the people, the foster
Mhm.
parents or the carers,
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
detergent were you using? Because that difference in itself can make, then you're coming into a bed that smells like the bed you were
Similar.
used to,
Yeah,
right? Very
exactly.
familiar. And I think
Yeah.
people think, and if you can take the pillow as well, right? Because they're used to that's their pillow. And how wonderful when we find a pillow that just suits us just so.
Mhm.
So all of these
Mhm.
little, we call them little things, but they're actually very significant. And they're part of making and setting traditions within your own home and your own dynamic, right? Which help a child transition and settle in a lot more smoothly. So I think that, yeah, it's just beautiful to have
So
that.
Judith, now tell us some of yours. How were yours? And in your case, what do you remember?
Well, for me, it was so coming from Haiti, for those who may not be familiar, I was adopted from Haiti to Canada, and my parents were white. Well, they still are. So my parents are white, and they had three biological children who are white, and then they adopted myself and my brother at different times. So we are both Black and we're both from Haiti. They adopted me in the late 70s, early 80s, and my brother in the mid 80s. At that time, it wasn't actually mandatory to travel to the country to collect the children yourself. So my parents have never been to Haiti. They had a few friends that they knew who lived in Haiti, who were missionaries, but they themselves had not experienced Haiti and all of its beauty and culture and wonder. And that unfortunately did a bit of a disservice to myself and my brother, because they did not then have any sort of examples, any cultural examples to bring into the family home.
Did they ever cultivate any Haitian friends at all, friendships at all along the way?
Unfortunately not, no. So I didn't grow up with any sense of Haiti from a really lived experience. What my mother and I did do was we would cut out articles about Haiti. So they had an awareness that it was important to be aware of the country. Unfortunately, a lot of those articles were very negative because, of course, the
Mm,
media, presented the side of Haiti that
always.
most people know about, right?
Yeah.
Natural disasters, crime,
Yeah.
corruption, political unrest. There's
Yeah.
this narrative about Haiti that unfortunately has been very, very negative. And so that's really the image I grew up of Haiti. And it was hard because when I got a chance to go back and started meeting Haitian people as an adult, I was sort of, I say it was an awakening
Yeah.
into, wait a minute, this is a
Yeah.
beautiful
Yeah.
gem of the Caribbean. It used
Yeah.
to have a huge tourism industry. It used to be celebrated. Dignitaries and the rich and famous used to go to Haiti. It was truly a jewel of the Caribbean, and its history is so incredibly rich. You know, the first country to be emancipated of slavery. They fought and won that. And we celebrate that. So now I'm very excited because we do celebrate our Independence Day is January the 1st. So the same as New Year's Day. So as an adult, I started to learn and cultivate my own celebrations around Haiti. So as a child growing up, I'll step back a little bit. We celebrated, my parents are Christians as well. My father's a minister, so it was very much around the church. And of course, Christmas time for us was very, very big, more so from the religious context. We knew Santa was not real. My parents made sure, but we still were able to have fun with it. We would go and visit Santa, but they made sure we knew the story of Christmas. That was what was a focus in our house. They do in the Christian faith, they use like an Advent wreath and candles, and you do a reading every night for the month leading up to Christmas time. So that was a lot of the tradition that I grew up with. Now I know for in Haiti, Haiti has a very large Christian and Catholic community. So from that perspective, that would have been similar, I can imagine, in many ways. But there's also the voodoo religion in Haiti. And that part was not, I didn't really know anything about that at all. And I'm still starting to learn and explore that now as an adult. But I do wish I had had some more Haitian elements, of course, growing up, from the food. Like you were talking about the food, and I was getting hungry. I was thinking, like, I love curry goat, I love my jollof rice, I love rice and peas. But really growing up, I would say it was I was probably around 9 or 10 years old, and we actually had a family friend come and live with us for a few months. He was Jamaican, and he would sometimes cook for us. And I remember to this day the very taste of my first Caribbean meal. He
Oh,
made rice and peas and pig's tails. And I tell you, my plate was so clean that day. You know, I ate, I wanted to lick my fingers. It was so good. It was so different from, the sort of Scottish, American, Canadian blend of food that we generally ate growing up. The flavors and the seasoning, it was just something that was different. And although it was not Haitian specific, it was from my neighbors. Haiti and Jamaica are actually very geographically close to each other. So knowing that it was really significant for me. And I really cherish that. And I have the memory to this day. I'm in my 40s now, but I remember the taste of the food because having that was my first Caribbean meal. And it was a wonderful treat. So we did have some Caribbean people in our life.
Judith, I think what you experienced there was something like a kind of a race memory, wasn't it? Because even though you didn't know much about the Caribbean, the fact that that food was brought in was something in you remembering that there's a familiar taste from my past. And I think that's why you just latched onto that taste so much, the way that you did. But it's extraordinary how a lot of these things are not only physical, but they are also spiritual, as you saw in Laura Narata's case with that twin thing, the twin festival, which is where spiritually linked into it straight away.
Another great story that my parents, told me when I was older, because again, we were very involved in the church, as I mentioned, and we often, all of us children participated in the annual plays and celebrations, right, in the church group. And one year, I was probably about, I think, 4 or 5, somewhere in that range. And I was one of the sheep. We were little sheep. We were dressed up in our little costumes. We're on this big stage. And I must have been, I was about 4 or 5, I think, because we went to a very large, well-known church in Toronto. My father was on the staff there. And the seating was for several thousand people. So, and the productions were very well known. And so many, many people came. So we're on the stage here. I'm in my little sheep costume with many other children. And all of a sudden, a Caribbean tune comes on. Some steel, I think it was like a steel pan, a Caribbean beat comes on. And they said that all you saw from the sitting in the audience was my little backside popping up into the air and just swishing, sashaying to the music. It was automatic for me. It was like I just felt the tune,
Incredible.
I felt the beat, and I just started
It just moved your body.
and everybody, of course, burst into laughter. I didn't even think about it. It wasn't something conscious. I just did it. And I always think that is so pivotal to me. What a beautiful, as you said, it's truly within, like, I believe my DNA.
Yeah.
There were elements to me that I just connected with.
Yeah.
And I tell you, music for me now is so powerful. It's such a part of my life. I love all types of music, but I really did gyrate towards the Caribbean, the African, to drums, to that sort of ancestral music that is so beautiful and so enriching. So for me, I think there were elements throughout my life as I was little that I got nuggets of it, but 100%, I do wish I had had more of that, for sure. We had wonderful customs growing up, which were great.
But I think also this speaks to the fact that when people are, particularly when they are going to adopt transracially, these are things they really must think about. And while some of them are physical, a lot of it also is spiritual. And spiritual things are things that are not tangible. And you have no control over that one because it'll happen anyway. I mean, an example is what happened to Alacha and Lawe in Ghana with the yam and the egg. I didn't even know that culture, but fortunately my mother did, so we were able to pick up on it. But, and also the thing about the names, the fact that they literally latched onto the twin names, which was interesting. And when you think that these are foreign names as well, they're not English sounding names. But they latched onto it. And as I said, they didn't understand the language, but somehow spiritually, they imbibed the ceremony, which was meaningful to them. So you realize that if you do adopt transracially, you really must do everything you can to inculcate the person's culture, find out about it, and bring as much of that culture into it as possible. And I remember one day they were being asked about the fact that they were being adopted by a Ghanaian. And they said, well, all we've done is just been taken back to our roots. And I looked at them. And I thought, if only they knew how profoundly meaningful what they said is, because that's what happened that day. Their name and the whole thing, they have literally been propelled back into their roots.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. It really
It
is.
is extraordinary. And I think some people might think, oh my goodness, am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? And I really say to people is connect with people in the culture, in the religion, right? And I think blending of religions is one that can be very tricky for some people, right? And I remember a colleague of mine many years ago, she was Jewish and she adopted 2 children, I believe, from Guatemala. And she wanted, as part of the Jewish custom, is to have a bar mitzvah, of course, right? And often for girls, they do a bat mitzvah. And she wanted the children to have that experience because that was part of her culture and her religion. And she thought, but my children are Guatemalan, so how do I bring in their culture as well? And she told a story of using, I believe it was like a woven blanket, a very, very special, meaningful blanket from Guatemala, having it specially made so that while they were doing the Jewish ceremony, they actually were cloaked with their Guatemalan blanket. And when she told me that story, I thought, what a beautiful example of how you've blended these cultures together, and how you've taken yours and you can honor and celebrate yours, and you want to share that with your children, but you're not putting that on top of them and overpowering it.
But also, if, for instance, you get a Christian who adopts maybe a Muslim, I don't see why you shouldn't then celebrate your Christmas celebration and celebrate their Muslim celebrations too, in the same way, equally. And maybe you do not believe in it, but you do it for the child's sake. Because the child might not actually believe in Christianity, but you're forcing them to do it. So if that child is doing yours happily, then you make the effort also to do theirs. And even if for you it's play acting, it's okay. Because you see, the child then knows that you're accepting all of them.
100%.
Yeah. And that's what we're trying to say. And find out what kind of things do they like in their culture? What kind of things do they do? And introduce it into your way of life. I think that's the key thing, introducing it into your way of life. And so you've got to make sure that these are things you can introduce comfortably. And if you're not comfortable about it, don't do it, because the child will pick up on it.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to have understanding with yourself before you move forward with an adoption. If you think, oh, no, that will be too much work, I don't know, I don't understand, I am not willing to learn, then I would say, agree with you, take a pause and maybe look at a different type of adoption. Different child, who is of a similar background to yourself. I do think that's important. And I always say that to folks is it's not for everybody, and that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be. So,
and so I put it this way, that if you can't move that child's culture into your way of life, don't adopt a child of that culture.
100%.
If you can't adopt it, if you can't adopt the culture, don't go there.
Don't go there. I love that. Yeah, don't go there. Don't go there. Just leave it alone, for sure. I think one of the other things that for people as they move into more of a reunion or openness, which is happening so much more now within adoption, as we've talked about in previous episodes, staying connected to first family, biological family, and around celebration time, of course, people think family, friends, you want to be with the ones you love during this holiday season. I know from reuniting with family that sometimes can be a bit of a tricky balance, right? Who do I spend this holiday with? Where do I go? How do I do that? How do I divide myself in many parts and without having people be upset with me? Because it is a big responsibility. And I always say, well, as we heard at the beginning, there are celebrations from November to January during this holiday season period of time. Don't use just the narrow few days that so many people celebrate over. Expand the time and let people know what you're going to be doing. Give advance notice.
Spread it out. Just spread it out,
Spread it out. And
be with mom, my biological mom, for Christmas, and I'll be with adoptive mom for Boxing Day, and I'll be with so-and-so for New Year. And so you cover all of them, so you don't put pressure on yourself. And you explain to them, it's all meaningful to me, and therefore I want to make sure I'm with everybody. And I think it's just up to people around us to understand and not take offense that, Christmas is the most important day, why aren't they spending it with me?
Yeah.
Well, let's remember that when we made the decision to adopt them, they were not part of that decision.
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
never were. We always have to remember that. They were never part of that decision at all. And sometimes I even ask myself, if these children had been given the choice, would they have adopted me?
Mm,
Yeah, I had the choice, and so I adopted them. But if they had been given the choice and they saw me in a brochure or a magazine like I saw them, would I be the person they would choose? I don't know. They were never
yeah.
given that chance. And
Yeah.
I think we must always remember that
Yeah.
they had no part to play in it. So when we're doing things, we must always remember that we have to consider their thoughts, their feelings, and their spiritual inclinations as well. We have to
100%.
remember that.
And honoring them and where they're at
Honoring
on that
them.
journey, and knowing that it's okay if they don't, as you said, follow the same faith or religion or practices exactly as you do, but let us offer all of them and to the child, and then as they get older they will make that choice and that selection.
That's
and
true.
and you can also celebrate, there's so many cultural celebrations that exist throughout the holiday period. It doesn't all have to be based on religion, and that's important too, to honor and celebrate those days.
To tell you that when I do want to go to church and they don't come with me, I do feel quite offended. I'm only human. You
That's
know,
fair, of
what can
course.
you do? Well, and I say, okay, well, they're not going to come. All right, then. Okay, we have to live with it. And life goes on.
But that's so honest, right? That's part of the journey. It's like, oh,
All
okay.
right,
And
then.
of course, we know that happens in non-adoptive families too. And people
That's
will
it.
say, no, no, that doesn't resonate for me.
Yeah, and that's
Now I say
okay.
now for myself, I subscribe very much spirituality opposed to definitive
Yeah.
Christianity. And that's a journey that I had to go on for myself. And I had to carve out what I resonated with. And I feel comfortable in that. And I'm raising my children with, we celebrate Christmas. We also celebrate Kwanzaa, which is a beautiful cultural celebration taken from the continent, but created in America, actually, by a Black American who thought we need a celebration to honor our African ancestral history and to acknowledge that. And it's a beautiful celebration. And my children get very excited about it. And it's a beautiful way to bring in that cultural element without any religious connotations, but it's an honoring respect and really teaching your children key principles of life.
That are steeped in their history as well. The history that they would probably never learn in school. And I think this is the sort of thing that's opportunity for their parents to teach them at home. And I think that this is an opportunity that every African family should try to get into a culture or a tradition that enables them to teach their children about their heritage. And one of the things we haven't talked about, kind of negative messages that you had when you were growing up, because that's all you ever saw in the news about your heritage, and what the kids experience in school and what happens when they come home. That's another lived experience that I think we should have a discussion on.
Yes, yeah, no, I was just going to say that is such a big topic to discuss.
Yeah,
So stay tuned, folks, because there's lots more to come.
yeah.
As we wrap up, I do want to honor and acknowledge again, as you said at the beginning, those for whom the holiday period is actually very difficult, and those who have been adopted but may have lost connection through a variety of ways, whether through death, by choice, by circumstances, and you don't have people to spend the holiday season with. I really want to acknowledge that and give space and time for that for a moment, because we want to, I guess, provide a few tips of maybe suggestions. I think by connecting with friends, they have this tradition now here in North America that we do Friendsgiving. So instead of you have Thanksgiving perhaps with your family, and then you have a gathering with your friends to celebrate as well. And I love that, because I think how important, and for some people, their friends are their family, right? We make families as we get older as well. We pull people into our lives who mean a lot to us, who we connect with. And connecting with people around the holiday time, if that is something you desire to do, is important. So I want to encourage folks to reach out to those who who may be alone during the holiday season. Invite them to your table. That was a tradition that we actually grew up with in my home that I really love. My parents were very aware of the folks who maybe were in Canada on their own, away from family and separated from them. So they would be invited to our Christmas dinner table, and they would be honored in that way. And I've continued that tradition. I lived in the UK for many years. And so I found myself in that exact circumstance where I was now alone for the holidays. And I'll never forget the first year a friend reached out to me, and I'd just been in the UK about 3 months. And she said, come to my place, stay over, come to my place, we'll have Christmas dinner together. And for me, her Christmas dinner was curry goat and rice. And I thought, I've never had this for Christmas before. How different. I'm used to a traditional bird with the trimmings. But I tell you, another time when I really wanted to lick that bowl because it was delicious. And it was a beautiful way to acknowledge a different way of celebrating the holidays. And by being with my friend, I missed my family desperately. And I was able to call them and chat with them. And that was very special. But the fact that she reached out and invited me to come to her home so I wasn't sat on my own on Christmas Day was beautiful. And I'm forever appreciative of that.
Judith, having said that, I think one of the things that I would also encourage adoptive parents is that the journey of an adopted child, especially when they're adopted alone, can be very lonely.
Mm.
And it is important that the parent helps them to cultivate friendships, teach them how to make friends, teach them how to get a best friend. And if at all possible, help make the friends for them. I did it with my children. I had people around that I knew. I made friends for them because I knew how important friends would be for them. They have an extensive family, but they may not like the family. They may not. And I don't want to force them onto the family, but they can make friends who can become like family to them. And that's the thing that I think adopted children more than anybody need, because as they get older, you start aligning with what comes naturally to you. And what comes naturally to you may not be aligning so closely with your family, except for obligation. But you would want to be able to align with somebody that you feel a kinship with, and that could be a friend. So we want to do that. I'm fortunate, actually, that the people in my family are all their friends' family as well. So that's a
Which
good
can
thing.
be beautiful. Yes,
It is
100%.
brilliant. It's actually brilliant. Yeah,
You
they are.
separate, right?
But
You can
even so, it's important that you help them to make friends, because unfortunately, some of them don't make friends. They don't make friends and remain very much alone. And that is what I really urge every adoptive parent out there to look out for, to help those children to make friends and have faithful and loyal friends with them and teach them to be loyal. That's the thing. Because if you're loyal, you'll attract loyal people to you. And that's what it is.
Add another layer to that. It's important as well that your children are in an environment where they see other adopted children and they can create natural friendships with other children who are also adopted. Because as you're talking about that loneliness, it can feel very isolating when you don't have other people to connect with in your experience.
Yeah.
So I think that's another layer to, and now there's so many groups and organizations that have meetups and hangouts for young people to connect with other adopted kids. And doesn't mean you're going to sit there and we're going to talk about adoption all day. It's just a natural formation of friendships, but there's a connectivity. I know I found this as an adult, and I think, oh, I wish I'd had this when I was younger, because it really does make a significant difference when you realize there are people who are walking on this path and this journey similar to yourself. So just want to add that in as well. And if you don't have people and you're not interested in the holiday, do something special for yourself. Celebrate you. Celebrate the you that you are. Take care of yourself. Do extra self-care, as I call it, or self-love that day. When there's a holiday that comes up that might be triggering or overwhelming for you, it's okay to have time for yourself, as long as you're not isolating yourself completely, but take that extra time. Go on a spa day or have a pamper me day. Do something meaningful for yourself on those days if you don't want to, actively celebrate a holiday. So just take care of yourself.
Also, the other thing that is very good for the soul to help you get that feel-good factor is volunteering for charitable organizations. When you do it, the feeling you get inside of you, knowing your existence is making a difference in somebody's life, it's such an incredible feeling. And every adopted child needs to go through that feeling because they've had such horrible experiences a lot of the time that they need to be able to understand and take into them that feel-good factor that you get from helping others. And so I'll leave that also with you. So on this note, we'd like to round off the evening and say a very big thank you to all of you for sharing our holiday discussion with us.
Thank you so much. And please remember, you can join us on our socials at Adoption Dialogue, and that's dialogue spelled DIALOG. So join us on Twitter, Instagram, and email us at adoptiondialogue@gmail.com with any questions, comments, concerns, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Happy holidays to all who celebrate.
Happy holidays. Thank you. Bye-bye. To all adopted people around the world, I dedicate the song Desiderata by Les Crane. And remember what peace. It's a powerful, life-changing poem for hard times,
which inspires hope for all who hear it. My message to all adoptees is summed up in the chorus: you are a child of the universe. No less than the trees and stars, you have a right to be here. And whether or not it's clear to you, no doubt, the universe is unfolding as it should, and you have a unique and very important part to play in it. So stay strong, positive and focused, and you will thrive. I want to thank you all for joining us at Adoption Dialogue. If you have any questions or comments, send it to us at adoptiondialogue@gmail.com or drop it in the comments section of our social media platforms with the handle Adoption Dialogue without the UE at the end of dialogue. Thank you again. Stay tuned for our next episode on social media. Bye for now and stay blessed.